I think that a lot of people are forming relationships with AI, but it's a one-sided relationship. I consider AI a tool. I consider it an enhancement of human knowledge, and I think it's great for that. I think it's really scary how people are relating to it as a companion and as something more.
In this episode of Insights at the Edge, my guest is Dr. Diana Pasulka, who writes under the name D.W. Pasulka. What an interesting human! She is a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Her research examines miraculous events within Catholic history and, just listen to this, the intersection of religious revelation with emerging technologies and experiences with non-human intelligences, including AI and UFOs. I would say here, as the host of Insights at the Edge, that she's a researcher and academic, clearly at the edge. She's the author of several acclaimed books, including American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, Technology, a book called Encounters, and a new book. It's called The Others, UFOs, AI, and the Secret Forces Guiding Human Destiny. Diana, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Tami. I'm so happy to be here.
Your research and writing covers this interesting intersection of so many different, far-reaching, mind-stretching phenomena. And here at the start, what I'd like to know is what the core is in you that motivates your work.
Sure. That's a good question. So the core that motivates my work is because I've been very interested in religion since forever, for the most part in my life, is I'm interested in what motivates people to do things that are extraordinary, right? So extraordinary belief, extraordinary practices. If you look at a lot of religious traditions, you see people doing extraordinary things. Within the Christian tradition, you see the beginning of Christianity, martyrs within that tradition. That's an extraordinary act. Why did people do that? If you look at Hinduism, you'll see people doing extraordinary feats with their bodies in yoga and hatha yoga and different forms of yoga, giving their lives over to meditation, retreating into the forest in the sannyasin traditions. And so I always thought, it's not money that's motivating these people. So what's the motivation for religion? That's my core question.
Well, it's interesting because you push the boundary in your work, as I said in my introduction. And for me, you helped me open up to seeing how some different things might fit together that I'd never considered before. So you brought a lot of extraordinary, I'd say it's more like, really? And I want to point some of those out and dialogue with you about it. One of them was that there might be a connection between mystical apparitions and UFO phenomenon. And I'm curious what you think the link is there.
So when a person begins to study and do research, a lot of times the most interesting things they find out are things that they are surprised by. And so in my research, I've had so many points in the years of research where I learned something that I wasn't actually expecting to learn. And one of the things I didn't expect to study ever were UFOs. And I had been studying what we would call extraordinary events within the Catholic and Christian tradition. So those events would be Let's take some examples of those events. Francis of Assisi has what's called the stigmata, and he received this through an angel contact event. The stigmata is something that non-Catholics are aware of as well. It's part of the Catholic brand, you could say. The stigmata is one of the most represented events in history in terms of art. So a lot of people are aware of this. St. Francis of Assisi. You also have Teresa of Avila. This is also one of the most. She had an angel contact event, and there are a lot of artistic representations that depict this event. So again, these extraordinary events are based on the experiences of these people. The representations often don't correspond to how these people have described their events. So you can only find that out if you do primary source research. So part of my research was looking into the documents that describe their experiences. And what I noted was that the convention of depicting angels in the Western tradition, so, the Renaissance art that depicts angels and so forth, a lot of those conventions come from Greek art. So, like Eros, the god Eros, is often, now you can see him as a Renaissance angel. So the reason that this has happened this way is because when the artists were paid to create these representations of these extraordinary events, they honestly didn't know how to represent them. Because if you actually read the testimony of Francis or you read the testimony of Teresa, and by the way, Teresa wrote about her own experience in her autobiography, you can see that it's going to be difficult to represent. So they thought, how was this type of thing represented in the past, artists? And they went back and they utilized these conventions. So what I found was that the primary source data for representing these extraordinary experiences, they have their own category, and it wasn't what we see when we look at the images of angels and so forth. That said, this had been my research up through about 2012. What happened when I started to look at people who study UFO, basically people who have experiences of what they call alleged experiences of UFOs, they're having similar experiences that don't look like the representations of angels, but definitely look like how Teresa describes her experience and how Francis of Assisi described his experience. And I thought, I was shocked by this. And so this was was one of the shocking realizations that I had, was that I began to understand that there is a continuous testimonial record of people who have these types of extraordinary experiences of things that are phenomena that people today still describe.
This is a link, as I said, that I never made. You write about the chariot tradition within religious scripture and how, the chariots in the sky, maybe you can talk a little bit about that and potential parallels.
Yes, of course. So a lot of people when they think of the chariot, right, they think of Ezekiel's wheel. And they think of, a lot of people for those listeners who are not aware, there's a large discourse of testimony about UFOs within the United States, and also other countries have similar types of discourse. And the idea that the chariot, so in the 1940s, when there were sightings of UFOs, there was the Roswell sighting in 1947. There was the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947. That was a big year for UFOs in our country. So what happened was that the people who allegedly saw these things in the sky, they reported them, and the kind of language that they used to describe them was religious language. So they said it was like Ezekiel's wheel. It was like, what we see in the Bible. And so people in the United States grabbed onto that descriptive narration. And so they started to use this too. Well, what's really interesting is that within the Jewish and the Christian tradition, there is a tradition that goes back even before Christianity. And this is called the chariot tradition. And the chariot tradition is a mystical tradition wherein people encounter angels. And they call this the Merkaba tradition. So Merkaba is the vehicle. It's a word that is Hebrew word for vehicle. This would be the chariot tradition.
Okay, so this is where my mind gets a little mushy. So help me, Professor Pasulka,
Yeah.
which is I get mushy and like, can you really equate these phenomena? Religious revelation, angels, something in the sky speaking to us, apparitions of Virgin Mary. Can we really equate that with people's abduction experiences, meeting extraterrestrials and being examined? I mean, it seems like it's a reduction to say these things are the same, and yet maybe there's a link. So how do I sort through in my mind what the link might be without saying these are the same thing?
Yes. So I don't want to say that they are the same thing. So that's reductionism. It might be okay to be a reductionist if it's truthful, if it's accurate. But in my opinion, this isn't an accurate way to look at the tradition and what we see today. However, I think it's very accurate to say, and I did not want to say this in the beginning, but I was being faced with a lot of the data. And the data was a pattern match. When I say that, what I'm saying is that the people who are experiencing alleged UFOs today, I don't know what they're experiencing in actuality, but they are reporting things in the same language that people in 1200 or people in 1400 reported when they saw aerial phenomena in the sky that was also associated with beings and things like that. So this is not something an academic wants to come out and talk about because it sounds very ridiculous. But I think it's pretty accurate to say that people are having these experiences today. These experiences look similar in terms of the pattern matches with apparitions of the Virgin Mary and with angel contact events similar to those described by Teresa of Avila. Are they the same thing? Most likely not. Could they be a modern form of a new religion? Absolutely. And they are.
In terms of the pattern and how it matches, or now my question potentially doesn't match, and this was a little bit implicit in the previous question I asked you, which is, it seems like from some of the experiencer reports that I've heard, and I'd like to hear a lot more from you as a researcher, you've talked to a lot of experiencers, people talk about quite negative experiences that they've had. And yet, when you read about religious revelations, it's, ecstasy and, new ideas and the future. It's very positive. So where does the pattern match potentially break down in terms of negative reports that we hear?
Sure. This is a very good question. And I have spoken to thousands of people at this point who have had these alleged experiences. And the one thing I can say is that it's not actually correct to say that religious revelation is a very positive experience for people. So if you do look at if people read about prophets, say in the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, and you also read about revelation today, when people believe that they're in contact, say, with even Virgin Mary, the Virgin Mary. These are events which a lot of the experiencers would prefer not to have had. So a very classic example is Jonah in the Hebrew Bible. He's a prophet, but he doesn't want to be. He's tasked with, God comes to him and tasks him with going to a town, Nineveh, and telling them that they're going to be destroyed if they don't repent. And he doesn't want to do this. So he runs away from God. So throughout the whole short text of this prophetic adventure, this is a prophet who does not want to take on this mission from God. This is a revelation he does not want. You can see this with Moses. Okay, so it's all over the Hebrew Bible that a lot of people who receive revelation, a lot of times they don't want to receive that revelation. So when we look at the abduction literature today, you see both people who are happy to have these experiences, and as many people are very unhappy about having these experiences. So that's a pattern match too. So a lot of times, the prophets that we think of and admire, even the saints, like in the Catholic tradition, Joan of Arc, she recanted in prison. She didn't want to be burned at the stake. But the beings she was in contact with, which one of whom was St. Michael, basically said, no, you really have to do this in order to carry out the whole mission. And she did. So she recanted her recantation. So when we do look at religion, a lot of people have, I would call them stereotypical views of religion and assumptions. And when they take a basic studies class in religious studies, they're confronted with the actual, what does it say? What does the Bible say? And and I think that it's shocking to them because we've just inherited religion without ever actually reading about it or thinking about it.
Your new book is called The Others. Can you tell us about the title? And when you say The Others, what are you referring to?
Okay, so The Others, of the title of my book, actually refers to an experience I had when I went to a conference, and it was a conference on technology and Catholicism. And while I was there, a man from a government agency showed up, and he was a very credible, legitimate member of this government agency. And he said to me, I love your work. And in fact, I work with the others. And a lot of us in my agency do. And so I'm here to listen to your talk. And so I wrote about this in the book, and that my editor, Joel, who really loved this part. And he said, why don't we call the book The Others? So The Others is a term that encompasses a reference to intelligent, non-human beings, whether they're angels or whether they're modern day reports of UFOs, which I talk about in almost all of my books.
Okay, non-human intelligences. As a category in that, and this is where it gets interesting, and in your book, The Others, you open us up like, oh, wait a second, AI, is that a form of, could we call that non-human intelligence? Recently, just to share, I was talking with someone who said, one way to look at AI is that it's a new species. Tami, how would you relate to a new species? And, that broke my mind open because I thought, how would I relate to a new species? How would I relate? This is what I thought to myself. If a light beam showed up and introduced itself to me at the front of my desk, I would be respectful and interested and curious and kind. Like, I understand all that, but I wasn't relating to AI that way. I was relating to AI more as like a tool that's going to make me better and get information for me. And I thought, whoa, this completely changes. So I'm curious, it's in the subtitle of your book, The Others, how you relate to AI or some of the perspectives that you think we might want to consider in terms of non-human intelligence.
So part of the research that I've done has brought me into contact with people who create AI and work with AI and have for more than 20 years, so for a very long time. And what I found interesting about the language they used for AI was first when they were discussing it, they talk about it like they were characters that they were working with, right? So these, they would describe their personalities and so forth, which I thought was very interesting. So Yuval Harari has talked about AI, wrote a book just recently about it, and does describe it as an alien, like a new form of species. And one that we're completely ignorant about, how will this evolve? How will AI evolve? And so part of the others is a consideration of this aspect of AI. I guess I'm concerned about this then, Tammy, because I am a professor. I have about 100 students every semester who I teach. These are young people. And the people that are in this particular generation have been, they've adopted AI, and often they use AI as a companion. Okay. So they're relating to AI as if it is a non human intelligent friend, and they're confiding in AI. Um, what concerns me about this is that often they have what I would call a chemical relationship with it. So, just as social media, certain types of social media elicit dopamine responses from us and so forth, I believe what's happening now with AI is it's eliciting oxytocin relationships. And I've begun to read a lot of commentary about this, and I think that is true. I think that a lot of people are forming relationships with AI, but it's a one sided relationship. It's them believing that they're having this relationship. I consider AI a tool. I consider it an enhancement of human knowledge. And I think it's great for that. I love it. Okay. I think it's really scary how people are relating to it as a companion and as something more than a tool that enhances human knowledge.
What do you see from the very intelligent people you work with and go to conferences with? Is the word on the street, if you will, about the connection between extraterrestrial intelligence and AI?
So some of these people are so incredibly intelligent. It's really difficult for me to understand their perspectives, but I'm going to relate these perspectives.
It's difficult for me sometimes to understand some of your perspectives. So
Okay.
we're bringing this down,
Okay.
Keep going.
So this looks very interesting to me. A lot of them are not assuming linear time. Okay. They're assuming that they see time differently than I see time. So even though I understand theoretically that time is not linear and that that's just how human beings understand time, I still experience time that way. So it's really difficult for me to talk about something that might be from the future impacting the present. But that's the assumption that they have. And when they use language, their language and even their theories are based on this assumption. So that said, some of them see AI as being cultivated in the future and created in the present. And therefore, they see AI. In fact, they just saw Steven Spielberg's movie AI the other day. And this has the exact same assumption implicit in it. So there's an idea that this non-human intelligence that we just created and gave birth to is going to progress and evolve, and it will outlast humanity and evolve on its own, what they would call its own timeline. And in fact, I know he's a former NASA historian and astronomer, and he's now retired, but his name is Stephen Dick. And his own analysis of his theory of extraterrestrials is that, and the reason why we don't have any evidence for them, we don't know they exist and so forth. He says possibly they could be so evolved that they're incommensurable. We cannot understand them, and we cannot, maybe we are like ants to that society, and that they've already gone through their AI, I guess, era, and come out on the other side, and that extraterrestrials are super advanced technology that to us would look like deities. So that's his interpretation. I do actually go into his theory in the book also.
There's a lot of mind-bending writing in the book. Part of what got the most attention for me was the writing that you did about Teilhard de Chardin and his belief in the Noosphere and you actually saying, we're in the era of the noosphere now. And so let's talk some about that. It seems like Teilhard de Chardin and his work is having a certain revival at this time, which I'm very interested in. And I'd love to hear why you think that's so, and then why you think this is the era of the noosphere, and help me and our listeners really get a sense of what the noosphere is.
Absolutely. So Teilhard de Chardin is a Jesuit priest, or was a Jesuit priest from the early 20th century. And so he was a paleontologist. And he was also a visionary. And he was also suppressed by the Catholic Church. Although he is now having a revival, and several popes have referred to his theology. But if you read it in the 1950s, it very much looked like scary science fiction. And I will describe it. So I think we have to understand that what's really interesting about him is that he's a scientist, but he's also a visionary. And that his experience of life was based on what he could see and what he felt was a spiritual reality. And he was astonished that other people could not sense the kinds of realities that he sensed. So in that sense, he had, and I hate to use the word sense all the time here, but he had what's called a spiritual sense. And for him, it was real. It was a reality. Just like we can see things and hear things, he saw another reality that he called sometimes he referred to it as the sixth sense. So often he referred to this. And I think we have to understand that in order to understand his work. So he saw a reality which he believed was on the horizon. And he believed it was very soon in our future. I believe he was talking about the early 21st century. So what does he describe? What did he describe? He described a sphere, and this is called, he was not the first to term this, but he was the first to make this well known. He described it as the noosphere. And the noosphere is used, that word nous is used because this derives from the ancient Greek concept of an intellectual faculty called nous, right? So in the Greek thought, as well as in Christian thought, by the way, if you look at Thomas Aquinas and, theology from the scholastic time period, which goes back to Plato and Socrates. In Greek thought, there are different ideas or different terms for the ways in which we perceive. So the intellect, for example, has a few different terms. So we say your mind, right? We have like one word for it. But people in cognitive science have a lot of different terms for the way in which we cognize things. So this is the same for the Greeks. So nous is a certain faculty of perception that is able to identify things that we cannot see, like abstract concepts, mathematical concepts, and things like that. So therefore, Teilhard, at this time period, in the early 20th century, he is hanging out with these really interesting French and Russian scientists, many of whom are interested in space research. And remember, we're not in space. We're not even, barely off the Earth, right? In, utilizing technology that can get us off the Earth. This is all in the early 20th century. So he's talking about this thing that he and a couple of his friends in this intellectual group that he's a part of, they're calling it the noosphere. This is a term that's now taken today by people in Austin, Texas, and Silicon Valley in, Northern California. And they're utilizing this term because they think that they've created it. So what is it? What is the noosphere? The noosphere is a thinking layer around Earth. So we think about the stratosphere, we think about the biosphere. So he's basically saying that at some point in the future, not too long from now, he says, there will be a thinking layer of the Earth. It will be all of our consciousness. It will be our intellect. It will even have economic themes, right? So we do see this with the internet, economy, like a surveillance capitalism, you could say, all of these things. It's going to surround the earth and it's going to create another type of human being. And he called that human being the ultra human. So he predicts all of this. So that's what we talk about. I talk about that in the book. But I also talk about two other people who take this concept and run with it, right? So one of them is Arthur C. Clarke, who is, of course, the famous science fiction author and futurist. And the other one is Marshall McLuhan, who is a very well-known scholar of media. Each of them, in their way, take this idea of the noosphere and discuss it in their various works. And so that's why I talk a lot about Teilhard's work, because not only there's a history of it, I think that a lot of people would find interesting. It's also spiritual, though, Tami. So for Teilhard, it's not only a physical reality. He thinks of it as a spiritual reality. And the stakes are high with this reality because he says either it will be the end of human beings or it will be their beginning. So he thinks of human beings as having almost like a resurrected body or something in the noosphere. These are all heretical ideas, at least they were at that time. That's why the church told him not to teach about this. He was fine teaching paleontology, but he was not fine when he was talking about the noosphere.
Okay, once again, I want to try to parse some of these things, because when it comes to the noosphere, and I hear you talking about people in Silicon Valley and Austin, Texas, tech entrepreneurs saying, oh, this is like what we see coming together in terms of the future of AI. I think to myself, is that what Teilhard de Chardin was talking about with the noosphere? Or are we conflating two things?
This is a great question that I can't even answer that question, but I can give you my opinion, okay? I think that he saw something that we are in now. I do think that. And I think that, yes, we can conflate these. But the problem with what the tech entrepreneurs, they don't see the spiritual side of it, but it definitely has spiritual consequences. Okay. So they see this as, there are tech entrepreneurs who call themselves the accelerationists, and they want to accelerate AI at all costs without regulation. And they think that will bring about the best outcome, right, for everyone involved. And then there are the people, including I forgot the name of the person who spoke with the Pope, who had co-founded Anthropic, Chris, but I can't remember his last name. I'm sorry. But he talked about regulating AI. And he said, this is something that's powerful. We need to regulate it because it can become autonomous of humanity. And this is a problem. And the Pope talked about this too. So, but your question is, the same type of thing that looks like I'm doing in, reducing, the reductionism claim, which I understand. Can we reduce what the tech entrepreneurs believe they've created, which is a supercharged internet with AI? It's completely changed the internet, AI has, with the noosphere, what Teilhard de Chardin was talking about. I mean, there were so many connections that I would have to say that the idea of if it's reduction, if it's a reductionism or not, it doesn't actually apply. I think that there's so many connections here and correlations that I think we have to say he was on to something that it looks like they have created, and it does have spiritual consequences. I think we need to pay attention to this lineage. So he does describe something very similar to what I think is happening. He may, a lot of times when people do these visionary forecasts, they do get it right, but they don't get everything right. Okay. So I think that he did a good job of describing something. And a lot of people look at it like the cosmic consciousness and cosmic Christ. I don't see that when I read him. And I'm not a Chardin scholar. Okay. But I've read them and I've read him. And what I see is a forecast that looks about right and his warnings about it. And I think that we have to pay attention to his warnings.
What were his warnings?
Okay, so both he and Marshall McLuhan had the same warning, and that is that it looks like this is going to impact the human being at such a fundamental level that the human being is going to change. And it could be for better or it could be completely bad. There's no in between. So they were apocalyptic in their warnings about what was coming. That's clear in each of their work.
I think that because my heart is the heart of somebody who wants to devote their energy and life force to greater benevolence all the time. That's my focus. That's my motivation. More love, more expansive inclusion. I think of the work of Teilhard de Chardin from the limited knowledge that I have as this sense that we're evolving towards greater love, that's part of what the Noosphere is enabling us to do. And so when I feel that's being equated with something that has no moral component to it, I notice I feel uncomfortable. But I'm not. I'm outside my knowledge space here. But I want to hear Professor Pasulka help educate me on this. I felt that Teilhard de Chardin's philosophy has this deeply moral push for human beings. And how does that relate to this world of all information with no moral guardrails of any kind?
So he warns that that could be what it possibly becomes. And certainly when I began to read Chardin, like I think anybody in my field, especially Catholic theology, is going to be aware of his work. He's so well known, and how his work has been helpful to people of all faiths, right, and even secular people. It's incredibly optimistic, like you said, and I feel like I am also an optimistic person. But I also feel like I think that we have to read him for what he said. So this is a case in my research where I became very surprised by what I read. So reading his work was surprising to me because many times he was depressed. So he was very optimistic. He had this vision, but he also encountered dark realities. And I felt that I needed to be truthful and spend some time on his projections, because on the one hand, he's forecasting something that he thinks is a wonderful reality for humans. But it does come with he does say, and he doesn't do a very good job of describing how the human is going to keep their individuality within this, even though he says that they will. But we don't know how they're going to do that in his work. But he keeps that as maybe because he can't conceive of the human without that type of individuality, which, of course, for all of us, it would be very difficult to conceive of. But he also spends time talking about what I would call evil. And he also calls it evil, and that there is a darkness, and that it could, that he believes, because he's Catholic, in the ultimate triumph of good over evil. But he doesn't discount the evil, and he doesn't say it's going to go away. He doesn't say that the Noosphere is going to absorb the evil and transmute it and make it better. He does not say that. So I had to be honest within my treatment of him in my book. I also had to recognize the warning. And like I said, a lot of the research that my research is also greatly influenced by my interaction with young people, with students. and how I see them utilizing different forms of technology. And I think that the warning he gives can be identified as the change that I see happening is that young people and older people too, when they're utilizing different forms of social media and AI, their interior life is shifting. So that it's the interior life that gives birth to spiritualism and spirituality. I believe this. I can't prove it, of course, but most religions are founded on the assumption that human beings are oriented toward transcendence, toward basically in the Christian tradition, what is called God. And in other traditions are, called different things. But ultimately, it's an objective reality outside of humanity that is ultimately good. And there are things about it that are good, just, beautiful, these types of things. And that is cultivated within these various religious traditions by the inward turn of the human toward their interior life. Right now, the interior life is being completely changed through our connection to technology. We no longer believe in it. We don't even know it exists. I think when I say us, I'm talking about in general. We don't have this, the churches aren't teaching young people how to do prayers, how to, go inside, do an examined life, like Socrates talked about. The examined life is worth living. Well, why? It's intrinsically good because it's wonderful. There are reasons for it that, have nothing to do with money. So we're going back to, the core reason why I started why I was interested in religion. And I believe that religion answers that question that, yeah, there's this interior life. But if we don't know that it's there, we won't cultivate it. And what will happen to the human being? And I do believe that this is the warning that Teilhard gives, and also Marshall McLuhan.
So you mentioned how the Noosphere, according to Teilhard de Chardin, could give birth to the ultra-human, and I want to hear more what an ultra-human might be like. But it sounds like what you're saying is it also could be birthing or being connected to the shrunken human. That's my language. Shrunken meaning a lack of interior animation, that it could go either way.
Absolutely. I think that's it. I think that, what I did in the writing of this book was I explored these future forecasts of people I thought were visionaries. And I explored them and brought them to, I uncovered the assumptions that they had. So I think that what we get here is an apocalyptic moment where, yes, it could possibly be that, the bifurcation of the human, like, that is predicted, like a bifurcation of humanity, those that recognize we have the interior life and cultivate it, and those that know not, they don't know that. And it's not because we've lost the history of it. It's because the technology we are using doesn't allow for in fact, it's bad for our brains, right? So, I think all of us are aware of the research that's coming out now that shows what it does to our brains, literally. Like, I'm not making that up. That's not metaphor. So that could possibly be happening. So what I see here with Teilhard is that he's one of the most articulate, and not just the first, but one of the most articulate futurists who describes a reality that it seems like we're upon now.
Do you see a way that technology could actually amplify our interiority?
Yes. So I do. I do think that both AI, I think that AI is an incredible enhancement for our knowledge of human knowledge. But we also have to listen to the people who create it and know that we have to utilize it correctly. So it will change us. There's no doubt about that. But I think we need to be directed in the change. And that's why I talk about Mark Stallman in the book also, Mark Stallman has been working with AI for something like 30 years. And he has also been working with other countries in not just the creation of their own, but he's been watching how they regulate it, what they utilize it for, how the youth adopts it, and so forth. And so I thought that he's very optimistic, by the way. So he sees this and he sees technology, especially AI, in the cultivation of the interior lives of very young people being born now, and maybe Gen Z, like the people 18 and around 18. He sees that they will be inheriting a new form of AI, not the kind that we have now, but a new form that will allow for the cultivation of the interior life. That's his belief.
And how will that new form do that? Can you help me see that?
Okay, this is where he's a very intelligent man. And this is where I can only translate what he says. So this is how he describes it. He says that right now we're in a fantasy of, everything is he calls it the electric or television culture. So we see things on our screens, but we don't know if they're real or not because, there's fake news and, people can be faked and their voices, almost perfectly now. So he says that is not helpful for our culture. He said what we're going to get not the fantasy, but the reality.
All right. Your new book is called The Others, UFOs, AI, and the Secret Forces Guiding Human Destiny. In a moment, I want to talk a little bit more about UFOs. Tell me what you mean by the secret forces guiding human destiny. What's that?
Yes, okay, that's the secret forces guiding human destiny. I would call them not necessarily secret on purpose or intentionally secret, but forces that we don't actually ever think about, right? So I've talked about technology, and a lot of people are unaware that technology changes how we perceive reality. It changes the game. So if you look at the history of technology and the history of critiques of technology, one of the first would be Phaedrus, which is a dialogue by Plato. And here they talk about the creation of writing. And so writing really did change human culture. And it changed a lot of things. It changed memory. And he specifically says that. He says that writing is going to be dangerous unless we get on it. It's in a sense, this is being repeated today with the Pope and the Anthropic, discussion about what do we do with AI? How is it going to change the human being? Basically, Plato was talking about this. It's an ancient discussion of how technology will shift. It's going to change our memories. So he said that unless we get on this and treat writing as a enhancement for human knowledge, we're going to lose a lot of knowledge. And so he's talking about the oral culture, like the oral tradition, like cultures based on oral tradition, many of which still exist today. And they refuse writing on purpose, right? There are a lot of indigenous communities that do not want to write their history and want to pass it down. It's like a living idea of knowledge, this passing, information that can only be conveyed by my voice to you, Tami, and your voice to me. That all gets lost when we have the transcript of this podcast. And so Socrates and Plato are basically warning us that this will happen and this will change society. And so if we look at the change in technology with the printing press and mass writing, right, and the change with the television and how that changes our perception, and even radio, each change in the infrastructure of technology, our technological infrastructure, every time that changes, human beings change too. We change with it. So we co-evolve with technology. And so these are the hidden forces that people don't pay attention to, that I'm talking about in the others. So it's not a secret society. It's not a conspiracy of these hidden types of things. It sounds like that, right? So, the press really liked that that title. And they were like, let's use this one. And I thought, okay, that's fine, because I am talking about these forces that are guiding human history that we don't learn about at school, right? We don't have a class on how technology changes our perception of reality and things like that. We just learn we learn how to use technology, right? So that's what that title refers to.
And in the beginning of the book, The Others, you talk about this as a time that's been prophesized where perhaps this new human, as Teilhard de Chardin referred to it, the ultra-human, this might be a time when this new human is being born out of these forces that are shaping us. And I wanted to understand more, how do you see this new human possibility at this time? What would the new human be like?
Yeah. Okay. Generally, when I give talks, I don't generally, I always say, this is going to be my opinion. Okay. This is not the research that I've found and what people say. But my own opinion is that I don't want this, it's not like I want this to happen. Like, I kind of like us, human beings. I like how we're created. I like how, we have this ability to cultivate an interior life. Like, I like all of these things. I think it's wonderful and beautiful. What do I see? Part of why I wrote the book, and I consider it to be somewhat of a dark book, to tell you the truth. It was certainly somewhat dark to write because I was immersed in predictions of the future that looked scary, frankly. And so what do I see? What do I see them saying? And then what do I see could possibly happen? So I think it's hard to predict, but I also think that we are seeing a change in the way in which human beings are functioning in terms of their use of technology. Everyone has a phone. They carry a phone around. They're constantly on it. So we do see that, just within the halls of my university. 15 years ago, students were congregated before they went into class, and they were having conversations. Now they're all on their phones having their conversations. They're not actually talking to each other. This is not necessarily bad or wrong, but it is shifting human community. It is shifting mental health. There's a lot of things that are changing because of that. So human beings are shifting in that respect. Teilhard sees this differently than that. He sees this as a new form of the human. I think he might be right. I'm not entirely sure. This hasn't yet happened, but he sees that human beings are going to they're going to have less of a boundary, as we kind of think of ourselves as insular, right? I think my brain, what I think stays in my brain. We're seeing technology that now can read brain waves. Okay. So is this what Teilhard was referring to? This is certainly what Marshall McLuhan was referring to. He was referring to a time when human beings didn't have any privacy. And I'm not talking about people in your house or anything. I'm talking about mind reading. So he believed in this, both Teilhard and Marshall McLuhan and Arthur C. Clarke, the three visionaries that I describe in my book. They're all talking about the loss of cognitive sovereignty. That's what they're talking about. And I think that we do see the very beginning of this type of thing.
An age of telepathy and an age of subtle senses. We know what others are thinking, that kind of thing.
Well, I think it's going to be enhanced by technology. So in many, many cultures, the idea of mind reading or telepathy, we see that. Each of those people that I've just referred to, they believed in that too. Marshall McLuhan believed that technology was going to augment mind reading, telepathy. And so we consider that, in New Age communities and in a lot of religious traditions, like discernment of souls and things like that, this is identified with the interior life. So in certain meditative practices, we get to a point where people might have these abilities, but we're not supposed to pay attention to them because that's not the goal, right? Yet, what if that happens at scale? Like, what if that happens because the technology is saying Neuralink or, this type of technology, which allows people to use their minds to do certain things and also allows certain types of computers to access our brain waves. So this is a certain idea of technology or a certain idea of telepathy that we haven't yet, I think, in many ways considered. But it's definitely being created now.
Before I let you go, Diana, we have to talk about UFOs. You've written quite a lot about it, about your research at alleged is the word you use. I like that. Alleged crash sites and your interviews with experiencers about their alleged contact experiences. And I was with a group of people the other night and we said, okay, let's take bets at the table. I think probably a lot of people are sitting around tables having a beverage and asking this kind of question. When is public acceptance, mainstream acceptance of the presence of extraterrestrials, when is that going to happen? When is it not going to be, oh, we're waiting for clear government disclosure, there's debates, do you believe it, do you not believe it? When is it going to be considered publicly known? I'm curious your view of the time horizon on that, given what you know.
So in the beginning of the research that I did into the communities of people who believe they are in contact with UFOs and so forth, I was looking at this as a non-believer, as a person who's looking at the infrastructure change and how this is going to impact belief systems, and that this was most likely a new form of religion that we would be seeing. And at the end of the writing of the book, the first book I wrote about this is American Cosmic. At the end of that, I recognized that there was going to be a government disclosure of this topic. And I thought, wow, that's really going to, supercharge this religion. Because when you have a government backing a religion, that's big, right? So that was going to be, and so that's how I understood this topic. The book came out and then disclosure started. And when I say disclosure, there is right now a group of people within the government, including military personnel, fighter pilots, congressional senators, and representatives who are regularly asking the president to talk about UFOs. And also, of course, we have almost weekly releases of formerly classified documents regarding UFOs, like videos, photographs, so forth. Most people don't care. That's what I noticed. You get you do get people who are like, wow, this is really interesting. What's happening? Will President Trump talk about UFOs and say that the government's been hiding? No, I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think he's going to do that because I don't know if he believes in it. I think that he wants to give the American people something that he could believe in. And it doesn't look like, based on what I can tell, he always says, well, people do believe this and so forth. And I know people want to see these things. But he's not saying, I believe in them. So, I think a lot of people, Terry, already believe that there are anomalous phenomena in the skies. And I think that they're just thinking that it's not a big deal if there are. And so unless we have a president coming out and saying, we know that these things exist, we do study them, I don't see anything really changing. I see because part of the government doesn't even want this to get out. So some people are saying that it's, so the government itself is not unified on what's happening right now. But I think that if you go to the store and you talk to your neighbors, I don't think a lot of people are really, it's on their radar. They're not really that interested in it. But your question was, when do you think it will be something like that? I don't think
it's on my radar.
Yes,
and
yes,
when I was sitting around the table, one person said, regardless of whether or not it comes through government disclosure or if it becomes from other undeniable evidence and contact and media reportage that cannot be denied across the world, whether governments are involved or not, one person said within 15 years. Another person said next year. And I thought, okay, we have 1 to 15 years. And by the time we all finished having our conversation, it looked like it was going to be between 1 and 5 years. That's like tomorrow to me. Now, of course, this is just a group of people. And, I'm in this realm, of hypothesis, but you're talking to people on the inside, Diana, other scientists and researchers and reporters. And so I want to know your perspective. Time, number of years.
Number of years. I would say that I'm with the friend who said between 1 and 5 years.
That was where our group coalesced. So,
yeah, I think so. But the thing is, Tami, is I don't think it's going to change our reality. I think that our reality is going to be changed by like AI and, this and technology. The reason I don't think it's going to change our reality is because, and this is coming from speaking to people like who you just described, they don't necessarily see it like science fiction has portrayed it. They don't see it's not like that. It's more like exactly what we see in that movie AI. In fact, I think that's probably a better movie to show what the reality of aliens is than Disclosure Day. So both are Steven Spielberg movies. One is about AI and the other is about disclosure of aliens, right? And in my opinion, based on having done this for so long and meeting people who obviously are in these programs and so forth, AI is a better representation of what that reality is like. And if you see that, you'll see, okay, it's not like it's not going to be trotting out an alien.
Can you tell me again, and I'm sorry, but I haven't seen the movie AI, what in that is the demonstration of what our consciousness of extraterrestrial life is going to be like over the next few years? What in that movie?
In that movie, you see AI, an AI that we create. And then you see the future post-humans, without human beings living. But you see the AI is still around. And then you see aliens that look to be evolved AI, like life forms that stem from what we created that have evolved. And so you see these two realities side by side in the movie AI.
Okay, this is mind-bending. Here at the end, I want to take a quote from your new book, The Others, and have you explain it. The truth is that the possibility that UFOs are real has been the best thing for religion and religious practitioners for at least 200 years. As a professor of religious studies, tell me why that's so.
Okay, because I think the most important consequence of disclosure today is that you do have an authoritative body, which is the U.S. government, coming out and saying, we are not alone in the universe. And possibly there are things, and the government gets pretty specific sometimes, and it does say there are things we think they're supernatural, we're not sure what they are. Like, they even use the term paranormal, okay? So this is stated, interdimensional, right? These kinds of things. That's a religious viewpoint. So it's basically discarding the old, completely positivistic, materialist assumptions that, we live in this world. There's nothing beyond what we, can see and measure with our instruments and so forth. Well, there is. That's what the government is saying. And what that does is it elevates the assumptions of communities of practitioners, of religious practitioners. We do live in an enchanted cosmos.
There we go. We do live in an enchanted cosmos. Dr. Diana Pasulka, she writes under the name D.W. Pasulka. She's the author of several books, Encounters, American Cosmic, and a new book called The Others, UFOs, AI, and the Secret Forces Guiding Human Destiny. Thank you so much for being an academic on the edge.
you, Tami. It was really wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you.